The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Madam Chair, let me start in a similar way that I started 2 days ago, and that is to express my appreciation to the staff who has done a terrific job of wading through a ton of issues, a lot of paper, in bringing this bill to the floor. I also want to express my particular appreciation to some unsung heroes, and that is the folks in Legislative Council. Because though members and staff come up with these great ideas, well, it takes the professionals to actually get that down on paper in legislative language in a timely way so that we can deal with it here on the floor, in committee or subcommittee, wherever it is. They do a magnificent job, and I don't think they get enough attention for the work that they do. In addition, I want to express my appreciation to Chairman Smith and to all the members of the Armed Services Committee for their commitment, for not just the work they put into it, but for their dedication and commitment to the country's national security. There have been some inferences and even more than inferences on the floor that there's some sort of political maneuvering or games going on. I have not seen that in the Armed Services Committee. I believe, to a man and woman, every member of that committee is sincerely dedicated to doing the right thing for the troops and for the country's national security. And the truth is, together, we've done a lot of good work over the years, 58 straight years. In recent years, we have together grappled with the problem that we were just discussing a few moments ago with readiness crisis that resulted in the highest number of aviation deaths in 6 years last year, in an increasing number of accidents. Together, we've grappled to turn the corner and do a better job. And there's a lot of pride in what the committee together has done over the years. But there is concern, at least among the members on my side of the aisle, that a lot of that progress we have made together stands a chance of slipping backwards with this bill. And you know, we spend 3 days going through hundreds of amendments. A lot of times we don't talk about the core of the bill. Let me just give some examples of the concerns that I have about the reductions in authorization in the underlying bill that make a real difference. For example, the underlying bill cut $295 million from aircraft carrier procurement, leading to a 1-year delay in the construction of the next carrier. Now, we need 12 carriers. We have 11. We're on a path to 9. And this, as a result of this bill, we're going to delay another year getting another carrier. It cuts $155 million from fast inshore attack craft mine countermeasures. Now, within the last 2 days, we've had some of these small boats in the Persian Gulf threaten British tankers, and yet this bill cuts $155 million from the sort of thing it deals with. A lot of us are concerned about what the Russians and the Chinese are doing in hypersonics. A number of people think they're ahead of us in a number of respects. This bill cuts $20 million from hypersonic wind tunnels and infrastructure. Makes it harder for us to catch up. This bill cuts $261 million from 5G next generation communications. Now, these funds were supposed to go to sites across the country to kickstart domestic innovation, explore 5G applications in military depots, seaports, defense manufacturing. It's a big deal for the military, 5G is. And yet, and we're competing with the Chinese especially. And yet the bill cuts $261 million from what the administration requested. It cuts $123 million from F-15 spares and repair parts. Now, 28 of these aircraft are grounded today. The average age of the fleet is 35 years. And yet this bill cuts $123 million from the spare parts to get those planes flying again. I think that's a mistake. The bill cuts $42 million for a missile defense test that was approved on a bipartisan basis for the SM-3 Block 2A missile. It cuts $376 million for next generation OPIR, which is the new satellite constellation to help warn against missile threat. Specific, concrete things. These are not numbers out of the air. These are specific things where members are concerned that it leads to sliding backwards on readiness or not making the progress that we need to make when it comes to our adversaries. That was the bill coming out of committee. But then, as we have heard, the bill took a disturbing turn on its way to the floor. I won't repeat the numbers about the Rules Committee. The statistic that just concerns me the most, frankly, is that of the amendments made in order that were contested, in other words, there was a debate, there was a difference of opinion, it was not agreed to. Of those amendments that were made in order, one was a Republican amendment. One. The one on Turner's on low-yield nukes, that's the only Republican amendment. The only Republican opportunity to shift the bill in a different direction. And then, Madam Chair, I note that the Armed Services Committee has put out a press release that's entitled Democratic Priorities in the FY20 NDAA. The first bullet says, quote, "This is the first time in history that HASC has cut $17 billion from the President's budget." First time in history. Not exactly a way to maintain a bipartisan approach to national security when you're boasting about, for the first time in history, that you're cutting a president's request more than ever. I turn to page 4, accelerates closure of Guantanamo Bay detention facilities, eliminates arbitrary statutory restrictions on transfer of detainees from Guantanamo Bay. Now, this restriction was put into law about 10 years ago under a Democratic majority and with President Obama in the White House. It prevented Gitmo detainees from being transferred to the U.S. It was taken out in this bill. Not exactly the way to build a bipartisan majority. On page 6, the headline is "Protects Against Nuclear Catastrophe." And underneath it says it prohibits the deployment of the low-yield nuke. It reduces requested funding for nuclear weapons by $608 million. Down a little lower it says it cuts $103 million from ground-based strategic deterrent. So, we're going to prevent nuclear catastrophe by cutting ourselves. It doesn't talk about what the Russians, the Chinese, Iranians, North Koreans, anybody else are doing. We prevent nuclear catastrophe by cutting ourselves. So that's the trend that this bill has taken as it has approached the floor. I realize that there are various points of view within the Democratic caucus. I note a political article that says Congressional Progressive Caucus are demanding a string of concessions from Speaker Pelosi and her top lieutenants. That's the concern, I think, that many of us have. Madam Chair, I would simply, I'd say two things. One is, unfortunately, this year in the House, we've spent a lot of time on messaging bills that are never going to be considered by the Senate, never get to the President. I don't want the NDAA to turn into a messaging bill where we can go home and brag about something we voted, but those provisions have no chance of becoming law. Secondly, lastly, I would just say there's a lot of good in this bill. Now, I've talked about some of the not so good, in my view. There's a lot of good in this bill. There's always, in an NDA, in a bill this big, good and bad. There's a lot of good, and a lot of members on both sides have contributed a lot of good. But the direction it has taken is not toward the good. And I would just suggest that members who do care about a strong military, about doing the right thing for our troops and for American national security, consider very carefully their vote on final passage when it comes that time. I thank the chair, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.